and welcome back. As you can see, base is already done because I want to try something a little more out there with my makeup. Found something on Pinterest when I was having a gander and I really want to try it. So that's what we're going to do. Today I'm going to be telling you all about the murders that went down at the White House Farm, also known as the White House Farm Massacre. Yes, massacre. It went down at this farm. Just a little bit of a trigger warning before we start. There's a lot of talk about mental health in this video and like suicide. If this is triggering to you, then I don't recommend watching this video, so hopefully I'll catch you in the next one. But for everybody else, are we ready? Okay, let's start with a little rundown about who these people are. This story revolves around a family called the Bamba Family. Bamba Family. The Bamba Family. This family consists of a mother, a father, their 2 adopted children, and then eventually sons, nephews, grandchildren. There was 2 children that joined the family because one of their kids had kids. I'm sure there was a much simpler way of saying that. They lived in White House Farm, which is in a little village in England. Everybody loved this family. Like, they were the family in this village. They were just everybody's favourite. Like, they got along with everyone. They were very religious. They went to church often, especially the mother. The mother did a lot for the town. Like, she was very respected, and like therefore it carried on into the family. Like, everybody, because they loved her, they loved the family. She was that girl. Okay, so now it's 1985. The date, August 6th. That's so dramatic. And the location is Essex, which is in England. South England, to be precise. Look at me and my geography. It's around 3:30 a.m. and a man called Jeremy Bamba calls the police in this very frantic state. This is because his father called him and said, "Help, your sister's got a gun and she's running around chasing everyone with it in the house." Now, obviously this is a good explanation as to why Jeremy was frantic, but it's also got something to do with the fact that when he was on the phone, he heard gunshots and then the line went dead. So all that's going through his head is, oh my god, did my sister just kill my father? So the police meet Jeremy at the house, but the police got there before him, and all they said like about the situation was that when they got there it was silent. Like, there was no noise whatsoever. The first thing the police did when they got there was check the perimeter of the house, see if there's any signs of like forced entry, but couldn't find anything like that. All of the windows and doors were locked apart from one window, which was on the bottom floor of the house. So this is how the police gained entry into the house. When the police got inside, all they could see was blood. Like, there was just blood everywhere. Jeremy's entire family had been shot dead. Jeremy's father, Neville Bamba, was the first body that they found. Also noting that he was 61 at the time. Just, you know, the more you know. They quickly examined the body and found that he had been shot 6 times in the face and 2 times on the rest of his body, meaning 8 total shots. He'd also been beaten up pretty bad, and they found like wounds all over his body that like implied he definitely fought back. Like, he didn't just let this happen. They were defense wounds. The next body that they found, I've got Nikki, one job. The next body that they found was a 61-year-old June Bamba, who was Neville's wife, so Jeremy's mother, and she was found in the hallway upstairs. She was only shot the one time and it was in very close range. Like, a second shot wouldn't have been necessary. They made their way further into the house and found 2 young boys, Daniel and Nicholas Caffell. These were Jeremy's 6-year-old nephews, his sister's sons. They'd also been shot and killed. They were shot a total of 8 times between them, and it's thought that they were shot while they were asleep because they were still like all wrapped up in bed. They make their way over to the main bedroom, and this is where they find Sheila Caffell, who is Jeremy's sister. She was laying on the floor. Like, she wasn't on the bed, she wasn't just anywhere, she was just laying randomly on the floor. This is the one that had the gun and was supposedly running around chasing everyone with it. She had shot herself twice in the throat. When they found her, she was still holding the gun and also like gripping onto a Bible. So obviously this seems like a very open and closed case, like it's a murder-suicide type of situation, because the entire family had been killed and then there's one person with a gun in their hand and it looks like they'd shot themselves because of where they were shot and all that stuff. And also then there's the phone call of Jeremy saying that his sister was running around chasing everyone with a gun. At this point everything was piecing up that indicated it's a murder-suicide. Whilst the police were in the house doing what they were doing, apparently Jeremy was outside like crying his eyes out, like having a breakdown. You know, he just lost his entire family. I'm not laughing at the situation. Nikki? But yes, he was outside crying and the police that were outside with him were trying to console him, offering him drinks, all that type of stuff. When the sun eventually came up, because all of this happened in the night, like I said, 3:30 a.m. the police went back to the house to try and see if there was anything else that would point them in a different direction. Obviously, like I said, they went down the murder-suicide route. They wanted to see if there was anything there that would indicate otherwise, but they didn't find anything. The house was completely emptied because obviously this was a crime scene. So everything was emptied out and anything that was covered in blood was then taken and burned. And then the bodies were taken to a morgue to be held until the funerals. And then the house was given back to Jeremy Bamba because he was the only surviving family member. When talking about his sister, Jeremy said that she had a very difficult life growing up. Like it wasn't easy for her. And this is all because of her struggles she had with her mental health. Saying that while she was a teenager, like all throughout her teenage years, she was in and out of mental institutes. And things didn't get better as she got older. Okay, I'm aware I look kind of crazy right now. I just had to start mapping things out. It'll all start piecing together soon. Anyways, let's get back into the story, shall we? As an adult, Sheila became quite addicted to cocaine. But she did actually manage to get over that. Like she swayed away from her addiction. She married a man that just couldn't stop cheating on her. And she very sadly suffered from a lot of miscarriages. And along with all of this, her mental illness was still very much a thing. She kept going into these very manic episodes, and then eventually she did get checked out in hospital and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Sheila's relationship with her mother was not great, to say the least. Like they hadn't gotten along since she was a teenager. Bearing in mind now she's a grown woman with 2 kids. So that's a long time to not get along with your mother. Like I said before, the mother was very religious. Like very, very religious. And as a teenage girl, you're gonna want to do teenage girl stuff that maybe your religious mother wouldn't like so much. For example, one day Sheila was sunbathing with her friend, who was a guy. Seems pretty innocent. Except when her mother caught her, they were naked. All they were doing in that moment was sunbathing. Like, we don't know the extent of the activities that went down, but they were sunbathing with no clothes on. And ever since then, Sheila and her mother, June, didn't get along. Like, she didn't get the normal telling off that you would expect from your mother in that situation. No. Her mother was shouting and shouting at her and actually called her the devil's child. Mother? So, I think it's fair to say that June wasn't the biggest fan of Sheila. And then in return, Sheila felt the same. So when the police were piecing together the case, the fact that Sheila didn't get along with her mother was some kind of explanation for why she did what she did. You know, just a lot of built-up resentment and often getting into quite manic states because of her mental illness. So things were making sense for the murder-suicide theory that they had going on. Now, I had to double read this while I was doing my research, but when they were arranging the funeral, everyone gathered at White House Farm, aka the murder scene. Like Jeremy and distant relatives went to where the family was killed. Like there wasn't a coffee shop nearby that they could have chatted out a few times a week. No? Scene of the crime. Sure. I'm obviously joking. It is his house and like it was his family's home for a very long time. So it's not too weird, but there's something dark about it, right? I mean, to be fair, everything that kind of indicated there was a murder scene going on in that house was taken out, it was burned, it was thrown away. So right now it just looks like a house. Okay, I had to like outline it and like start the gems because I didn't really anticipate how difficult this was going to be to talk and do this on camera. But we're here now, we're too far in, so anyway, let's continue. Whilst everyone was in the house trying to, sort the funeral out, Jeremy's cousin David decided he wanted to go and have a little look through some boxes that were left. And he actually stumbled across a silencer that had a little bit of blood on it. So he secretly went and turned it into the police. Like, he didn't tell anybody about it in the house, he just went and handed it in. For anyone that doesn't know what a silencer is, it's something you put on the end of the gun to stop it from making like such a big bang. Tells the gun to shut up just a little bit. Because obviously it's a silencer with blood on the end of it, the police take it and run some tests on it. The technology back then wasn't great, so it meant that this was a lot harder to get like a complete match for the blood that was on the silencer. But they were able to find out what type of blood it was. Like, I don't know the correct terms, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Your blood type. There we go, your blood type. There is one that I know though, because the blood that was found on the silencer was type A. So I know that one exists. Something very interesting about this is that there was only one body in the house from the murders that had type A blood. I'm just going to keep saying type A blood because now I feel smart. The only person in the house that had type A blood was Sheila. So now they were very, very confused because how did her blood get on the silencer, but then also in a box away from the bedroom? Like, this was under the stairs. Silencers don't have legs, so they can't just wander off. How did it get from the gun that Sheila was holding to a box under the stairs? Make it make sense. So now this obviously threw a spanner in the works and everyone was questioning what actually happened that night. Was she framed? That seems like the only explanation here, because the only way her blood would get on it is if she used it while she used the gun to do what she did. But then how did the silencer get downstairs? Again, we have questions. So now obviously the police need to look over everything again, but there is a problem with this because they first ruled this as a murder-suicide, as we know. So they didn't really pick up much evidence at the house that would help them kind of figure something else out because of how they ruled it in the first place. And it's not like they could just go to like a tip or something to see if everything's still there. They burn everything. One thing they were sure to do though was take pictures at the scene. So this is what they used to try and piece things together. They were looking at Sheila's photos and they found something very peculiar. With everyone else, they were completely covered in blood, head to toe, covered in blood, as well as everything in the house. But when it came to Sheila, she obviously had blood on her, but the bottoms of her feet were completely clean, which doesn't really make sense if she was the killer. Because if the whole house is covered in blood, surely as she's walking through it to continue with her massacre, wouldn't she have blood on her feet? Like, literally treading through pools and pools of blood would not leave you with the cleanest feet in the house. Another thing that they pointed out that Sheila could not have done was the actual shooting of herself, because she's a very, very petite woman. So her arms weren't long enough to reach the trigger, especially with the silencer on the end. Like, she wouldn't have been able to reach that far down and still have it pointing to where she was shot. Another very, very strange thing, we're just going to keep piling them on here, is that when they were looking at the pictures of her body, that sounds weird. When they were looking at those photos and noticed that she'd been shot twice, they began to question, how do you shoot yourself twice in the neck? It would have had to have mean, right, think of it this way. It's a rifle. It's not a little gun. It's a rifle. So you're already having to like position yourself, especially because she's, like I said, a petite woman. You're already having to position yourself in a way to get it to go there. Now, when you manage to pull the trigger, it's going to pull you back a little bit. Like, it's got a lot of impact. So it would have had to have mean as she's bleeding out through her throat, from her throat, English. As she's bleeding out, she would have had to have put the gun back to where she needed it to then do it again. And also, It's a rifle, it's in the throat, is too really necessary. So now everyone is questioning who's the real killer, because nothing is adding up. It was no secret that this family was well off. They had a lot of money and a lot of property. It was no secret that Jeremy was going to inherit a lot of stuff when his parents passed on. The house itself was massive. It had something like 300 acres of land, and this was just that house. And this house was, it was a manor. It was huge. His parents also owned an apartment in London that they rented out a lot, so that had constant income. Now everyone's thinking, maybe Jeremy didn't like the sound of having to share all that with his sister, and possibly her 2 sons. Was he a greedy boy? It's a possibility. We are now on the 16th of August 1985, and this is the day of the funeral for all 5 victims. Everyone was obviously looking at Jeremy at the funeral because, depending what you're thinking, either that's the guy that's just lost his entire family in a very horrible way, or because of all the whispering, you're very suspicious of that man. Either way, everyone was looking at him, and they said that when he thought no one was looking, he would start like smiling to himself, like giggling. I'm sorry, hun, you're at your whole family's funeral. There's just been shot to death, like the scene was a bloodbath, and you're laughing? You're not putting yourself in a very good light, darling. And then also, obviously, because this was an intense situation, the news knew about it instantly. So outside of the funeral, there was a lot of media, and apparently Jeremy played up a lot in front of the media. Like, when there was cameras on him, he would be crying, bawling his eyes out, having a breakdown. But then apparently as soon as the cameras go away, like as soon as he was away from the media, he'd just snap out of it and go back to normal. Now then, let's fast forward to the end of that day, the funeral day. It's now the night time. And Jeremy decides he wants to go and get drunk. It's not the most unusual thing to want to go and do that, fair enough. But while he was out, he kept making comments about how he runs things now. Came across kind of arrogant and cocky, and kind of seemed happy about it. Now let's return back to the silencer. You're all probably on the edge of your seats like, did anything else happen with the silencer? Yes, it did. They did fingerprint tests on it, and it came back that the only 2 people's fingerprints on the silencer were Sheila's and Jeremy's. Now they had some evidence on him. Little old Jeremy had some explaining to do. The police obviously brought him in to question him about this because why were your fingers on the silencer? But then Jeremy was very quick with his response and said, well, it is my gun. It is my silencer. I mean, fair. It doesn't seem too unusual for it to have been his gun because it was his family's home. But at first I did question why he had a gun because the laws are very different over here in the UK, so how and why did he have a gun? He said that he was planning on going hunting with his dad. Like they would go and hunt animals, so that's why he had the gun. But they didn't end up going through with it, so he just left the loaded gun at his parents' house. They had no way of proving whether he was telling the truth or not, but they didn't believe him. They had no evidence whatsoever, but they truly believed that he was the killer. Now at this point they thought they were, at a bit of a dead end because they had no evidence, and any evidence that there could have been was burned when the house got completely flipped upside down. This was until a certain someone called Julie Mugford called the police. Now, Julie Mugford wasn't just anybody. She was Jeremy's girlfriend. She called the police because apparently her and Jeremy had just had like this massive argument and apparently split up. So she was done covering for him. She was over it. She didn't have any evidence to give the police to, lock him up, but she did have her suspicions. Apparently he had been dropping hints for quite a few months leading up to the big night. He never actually came out and told her, but he was definitely dropping hints and she 100% picked up on them. Some of them were said in kind of like a jokey way. Him saying how he wanted to get rid of his parents so he could take everything that they have. Not quite something to joke about, but each to their own, I guess. I look so small sat here. I'm sorry, I should probably stop slouching. One thing I find quite spine-chilling is that earlier that day, the day of the killings, she heard him say the words, "It's tonight or never." As an actor, I'm loving the dramatics, but not the guy or the situation. They're still talking to Julie at this point, and she said that she thinks he might have hired a hitman to go and kill his entire family, like paying something like £2,000 to get the job done. But like I said before, she has no evidence to back any of this up, so the police are just taking this at like face value. They, with a pinch of salt, obviously hearing what she's saying, but not taking anything as fact. Now, back to the house. Remember how I said how it was completely locked up and there was only one window which allowed the police entry into the property? Well, because now we're looking at this as somebody having to actually get into the building because it's no longer being looked at as a murder-suicide, somebody would have had to have gotten in. It would have meant that whoever the murderer was would have had to have known that that was the only way to gain entrance. Julie said something to the police that kind of connected this for them. She said that Jeremy had told her about a window on the house that didn't close properly, and it was the only window that did it throughout the entire property. Kind of funny that it's the same window that the killer would have had to have gone through. At this point, so much was pointing in Jeremy's direction that they were adamant he was the one responsible. So now it's a month after the killings and they arrest Jeremy. They also arrested someone that they thought could have been the hitman, but he had a very strong alibi, so they just let him go. But when it came to Jeremy's alibi, he didn't really have one. He told the police that he was just sitting at home until he got the call at 3:30 in the morning from his dad. So like I said, not really an alibi. It's not that strong, is it? Because there's no one there to clarify that. There's no one to be like, yeah, he was at home. While they were questioning Jeremy, they pointed out that they'd spoken to Julie and said that she was saying things that were very incriminating towards him. And his response was, "We've been arguing, this is just her way of getting back at me." And then he went on to say why they were arguing, and he said that he'd actually been cheating on her for a long time, and she had just found out this past week. So they had been fighting on and off all week about this, and this was her way of getting revenge. Jeremy's not looking all too good, is he? Potential killer of his entire family, wants all their money, and cheats on his girlfriend. He even said that the arguments would go further than just verbal, it would be physical fights. Like apparently she smashed a mirror and took one of the pieces and chased him around with it. Like I've said multiple times in this story, they had very little evidence against Jeremy. And when it comes to holding people in custody, you can only hold them for 3 days. And if you haven't got enough evidence before the 3 days is up, you have to let them go, which is the case with this one. And you want to know something that's like laughable? Not laughable as in like haha funny, but when he got let out, he decided it was time to go on his hollybobs. He got on a plane and went to Saint Tropez. Is it Saint Tropez or Saint Tropez? You know what I'm talking about. France. You see what I mean by laughable? Like, not haha, but the audacity? Sir, holiday time? Now? Really? So, now he's kicking back, relaxing on his holiday, feet up, not a care in the world, whilst the police are building the case of all cases back home. They were talking to anybody and everybody, just trying to find out anything about what type of man Jeremy was. They asked his friends, his colleagues, his neighbours, the neighbour's cat, anybody that knew him. And it turns out he's actually quite a troubled child and had been ever since he was adopted. And as he grew older, things got worse. He was doing things like shoplifting and even going as far as drug smuggling. Now, a word that kept coming up a lot, or words, should I say, that kept coming up a lot when people were talking about him was that he was very narcissistic, very selfish, and he was all about the money. Let's just say he wasn't anybody's favourite person in the village. Now, we don't know the specifics of what went down when the police were doing their deep dive into Jeremy, but after his week-long stay in Saint Tropez, France, while he was at the airport after arriving back in the UK, the police arrested him there and then, on the spot. Like, welcome home, you're coming with me. They apparently now had enough evidence to charge him with all 5 murders. What went down in that week? Now we're in October of 1986, so just over a year after the murders took place. And this is when the trial happened. He obviously started out by saying he was not guilty. What's the correct term? He pleaded not guilty. There we go, got there in the end. Well done me. But don't worry, the prosecution came with receipts. They went through their entire story of what they believe went down on the night of the massacre. So, first of all, they believe that he rode his bike to the scene. I don't know how they got there, but apparently he rode his bike. And he was also carrying the rifle. And now you might be thinking, what led them to believe that he was carrying the rifle on the bike? Well, with the window that he would have had to have gone through to get in, there's like a red bookshelf type thing, and it had a scratch down the side of it, and they actually found traces of the red paint on the rifle. Oh, we love it when things piece together. That was so satisfying. Now, it's believed that everyone was asleep at this time when he got into the house, because it was 3:30 in the morning, 3:30 a.m. So it's not a stretch that everyone was asleep. And now we know that Jeremy was probably using the silencer when it came to killing everybody, because nobody seemed to have woken up. Take the 2 little boys, for example. They were still nice and warm in their beds sleeping when they were attacked. I think that's a fair thing, attacked. Now, one thing is that Neville was killed downstairs. Obviously the bedroom is upstairs, so how did he get there? There's actual markings on Neville's back that imply that he was being forced downstairs with the gun in his back. There's markings on his back that line that up. So that's what they believed happened with Neville. Then he went on to commit the rest of the murders, and then after all 5 were done, he then proceeds to try and stage it as a murder-suicide. So obviously he heads back up to where his sister was laying and tries to stage it as if she's the one that's done this. But now they're trying to think where his head was at when it came to taking the silencer off. They're thinking that he laid the gun on her to make it seem like, she was the one that was holding it, and realised, that's a bit too long. That doesn't seem correct. They're going to figure that out straight away. So he takes it off and hides it. Something that I literally just found out, before filming this video, after doing a little bit of last minute research, is that Jeremy was apparently in a very frantic state. He just heard that conversation with his dad, apparently. So you would think, being in that state and that much of a rush, you would go to the most convenient number, which, yes, it's the police. They've made the number 3 numbers for a reason. It's supposed to be 999. That's what you call when you're in an emergency and you don't know what to do. You call 999, and it's where your mind goes to. But with him, that wasn't the case. He actually called the number for that specific police station. He would have had to have gone to a phone book to find that number, and then type in the long number and then call it. That doesn't really seem like someone who's in a rush to try and figure out what's going on. When it came to Jeremy's defense, he just kept going back to the fact that his sister was not okay, that she had a lot of mental health issues, the schizophrenia. Now, apparently she wasn't actually schizophrenic, and this is more of a blanket diagnosis, which was apparently very common in the 1980s, that you could literally have bipolar disorder and they'd just say you're schizophrenic. And they believed that in her case, it was postnatal depression that they just passed off as schizophrenia. So the defense stuck with this and just rode with the fact that she had mental health issues and also didn't get along with her mother. So this is why she was definitely the one to do it. Now, there's something to note here. The night of the murders, earlier on in the night, the whole family were together, including Jeremy. They were all at the house and they all had a family dinner together. And apparently at this dinner, Sheila and June, the mother, had a bit of a falling out. And they had a falling out because apparently June told Sheila that she's not a good mother and that she should put her kids in care. Now you can imagine there's some sort of anger there from Sheila. Now, another point that the defence brought up was that the fact that the way Sheila was shot, it would have been kind of difficult for someone else to shoot someone like that, upwards. Easy for someone committing suicide, not so easy for someone committing a murder. But it's not impossible. Now, we already know that Jeremy had threatened Neville with the gun in his bag, so it's not too far to suggest that he threatened Sheila to lay down on the floor. He had it in his mind that he was going to stage this as a murder-suicide, so if he was going to try and pass it off that she was the one that did it, he's going to obviously try and do it in a way to make it look like she was the one that did it. So it's not a stretch, Regardless of what we think, even though it's what the prosecution was thinking too, he's the murderer. He was found guilty, nonetheless, of all 5 murders. And because he took 5 lives, it only seemed right and fitting that he received 5 life sentences. But still to this day, Jeremy is adamant that he is innocent. This has been regarded as one of the worst miscarriages of justice in the UK ever. Because if they did get it wrong, ooh. Jeremy's already served 40 years, so that would have been 40 years for something he didn't do, but we're still very sure that he did. But there's just no telling what actually happened that night, because everybody that was there is no longer with us. We just got to look at evidence given against Jeremy's word. Do you think justice was served? Do you think they got the right person? Or do you think this was actually a murder-suicide and they just decided to pin it on someone? Was this the first one I did that we don't actually know if it has been solved? Maybe. Anyways, makeup's done. As you can see, I was adventurous this time. I did a snake. What should we name him? How fitting though, I did a snake and this guy snaked his whole family. But yes, it was a faff. It was a faff, to say the least. Anyways, I'm going to stop chatting your ear off and I'm just going to say love you and goodbye. But before I do, if you did enjoy, make sure you hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. And yeah, love you and goodbye.